pleasure to welcome you here for the session of Learning from Leaders. After two successful events that we had in Barcelona and in Geneva in the fall during the Business Immersion Week, it's a pleasure to finally bring this event here in Munich. And we have two amazing speakers that will be sharing their experience and that will be interviewed by Peter Vanham. As you might know, Learning from Leaders is a story and an adventure that started over 5 years ago. We first had those events fully virtual, and slowly but surely we started bringing more on-site events. And the goal is to bring amazing and renowned business leaders so that they can share their experience, that you can learn from them, and that they can share their vision, but also their path on how they reached how they made their success. So there is always a lot of learnings. We try to have quite a diverse background in the speakers that we invite, and the feedback that we have received so far from all the students is always amazing. And it's also an amazing learning from the speakers that are coming. I had the opportunity just to share a little bit, and people were amazed about the multicultural environment that EU Business School represents. And that's clearly part of our DNA and clear an asset that you can experience on a daily basis. So please help me to welcome Peter Vanham and Ms. Judith Wiese for the first session. Thank you.
Thank you. It's such a pleasure to be back here. We're going to make sure we safely make it across the podium.
Yes, I'm the EHS officer.
And you got to take this
well.
in, Judith, because this is an amazing room. Also, of course, because of the people who are here. But 3 weeks ago, you probably noticed, but this was where the big event on geopolitics took place. So you are special for being here. You're all special for being here, and I hope we're going to enjoy that. Please take a seat.
Maybe not quite as disruptive, huh?
Yeah, I don't know what you're going to say about. Let's see what headlines we can make today. But Judith, I have to ask you, before we get into the tough questions, I have to ask you, we're here in Munich. You are working for Siemens. Siemens is based here in Munich, is that correct?
Yeah, Siemens was founded 177 years ago in Berlin, and then with Second World War ended up in Bavaria. A lot of our business headquarter is in the Erlangen-Nuremberg region as well, but the official corporate headquarter is here in Munich and not very far away, so this is probably a 5-minute walk from here, the Wittelsbacher Platz.
So you walked over here today?
No, I was somewhere slightly different, so I was dropped off. We're having a leadership team offsite with my P&O leadership team, People and Organization leadership team, and so this is where I've come from.
But I have been told by a little bird on my shoulder that you actually know the hotel also pretty well. You spent a couple of nights here once.
Yeah, well, I joined Siemens 4.5 years ago, right in the midst of COVID. And of course, I didn't have a home here at the very beginning. So as you do with a new board member, you put them up in the Bayerische Hof. And then very quickly, I found out that I have to order room service for a cup of coffee. And coffee is what I live by in the morning. So I swapped it for a hotel that has a coffee machine and where I can get the first 3 cups in as and when I like. I'm sure they would have provided a coffee machine as well if I had asked, but that is my experience with the Bayerische Hof. Beautiful room, but
not for living.
But the coffee machine was sacred, yeah, and that was absent.
Yeah, so that's wonderful. I'm going to stay here tonight, so now I know I can't have coffee. So you work for Siemens. You're part of what's called the managing board, which sounds very important, and I'm sure that it is. And Siemens is also very important. Is it like, would you say it's the largest industrial company in Germany, or how would you describe Siemens in terms of its size and also what it does?
Yeah, I think we're first and foremost a technology company. That
which company is not a technology
that
company
is
today?
177 years old. Yeah, but if you want to come to a place that does industrial AI, you come to us. Yeah? If you're looking for learning about AI expertise, we have 1,500 of those experts. But we have been doing technology that really sits in the backbone of societies and industries for the longest time, and whether it's the cable that connected, us across continents through the telegraph, whether it's the first, electric mobility through trams and the like, whether it's building technologies, or whether it is now, very much an automation, digitalization agenda that we drive. And given where we are, we are really also part of a lot of the big transitions that the world is currently trying to make, either through leveraging new technology like AI, or making the green transition that is just as relevant.
I want to ask you about the green transition, but just maybe to cap this, if we know Siemens today, I think I asked you this in a previous conversation, that I'm old enough to remember that Siemens used to make laptops, or screens at least, for computers.
Yeah, or coffee machines, and, that's no longer us. Yeah.
But today, I think I almost bought a Siemens washing machine, but that's then no longer what you do.
No, that's the Bosch Siemens Haushaltsgeräte company that has now what used to be our consumer arm, but that is no longer us. So the way that we're structured is digital industries, which is basically industrial customers that come to us for software, for automation, for digitalization. Smart infrastructure, which is no longer high voltage, because that is Siemens Energy that we spun out 4.5 years ago, but is medium and low voltage, and therefore very important in terms of energy distribution, balancing the grid software, but then also building technologies. How do you make a building energy efficient? How do you automate a building so that the light only goes on when people are there, etc., etc. And then we still have fully consolidated mobility. So if you took the train, particularly a high-speed train, here in the last few days, the likelihood that you sat on a Siemens train is very, very high. And then there is a company called the Siemens Healthineers, which belongs to us we own by 75%, and so we consolidate, but we don't operationally steer the business.
And that's the healthcare business, of course.
That's our healthcare business.
I mean, it sounds hard to me, if you're a founder and you want to create a company today, it sounds hard to me to come up with that kind of an idea. Or, some people might say, I'm going to create an app, or I'm going to, open a restaurant. But I think nobody came up with the idea and said, I'm going to create a huge industrial conglomerate that does high voltage or medium voltage, equipment that makes a smart AI, that makes trains and so on. So how come Siemens is what it is today? Was it always this company, and how did it transform?
Well, I mean, Siemens was a startup at the time. 1847, it was a startup, and I think it was the third attempt to get that cable for the telegraph from Europe to India that worked. If it hadn't worked, then I would have been bust.
And that was the start of the company.
That was
as a communications.
That is really how things started, and then quickly evolved into electrification in terms of mobility as well. But I think it has always had this DNA of the technologist. If I were to say, I think every company has hero jobs, yeah? And sometimes that needs to evolve, and part of what needs to happen strategically is to evolve. But the hero jobs personified by Werner von Siemens and Halske were the technologist and the person who runs the books. And I think this is what has worked for Siemens for a long time. But Siemens was also, over the years, one of those very first big companies or growing companies that, as we have seen in other parts of the world as well, took social responsibility on very early. So whether it was housing for people that worked for Siemens, I think our education system, in terms of apprenticeship, dates back to 1899. Yeah? So those were, or if you think about things like social security,
right.
those are things that date back literally 125
and
years
so
ago.
A company like yours, what it really does, it starts with one need that society has at that point in time. That was at the time telecommunication lines. but then it evolves along with society, and as society sort of advances, the needs evolve, technologies evolve, and that's how you end up with a conglomerate like that. So let me ask you now.
And we don't like the word conglomerate so
Oh,
much
you don't
anymore,
like? Okay.
given the fact that we have now spun out a number of businesses, and
so you are now an industrial company or no technology company?
No, but on a serious note, one of the big programs that we run these days is to become one technology company, because if you think about the value of data and the value of making things scalable, then you have to do a number of things that really run as one backbone, so that we can leverage data and AI in the first place, and that we have key playbooks for where that is important, and that our face to the customer is also ideally one face to the customer. So we're at the moment very much in conversation with ourselves and our customers to say, where do we actually need to be one, so that we can maximize on who we are.
You don't deal with 3 or 4 units.
How do we make sure that for our customers we're easy to deal with, but where do we keep what we call domain knowledge, where that is really a true differentiator for us and in the way that we serve our customers.
So that's the ongoing transformation of the company. Another major transformation that's happening, of course, Judith, across the global economy still is towards the green transition, right? Decarbonization, I think we've all not only heard about it, but a lot of the people in the room probably have a specialty in it, make a career in this. You're the Chief Sustainability Officer of Siemens. So when you put on that hat, what does that mean for a company like Siemens? How is it sustainable, and in what products would you say that it is sustainable?
Yeah, so Siemens made strong commitments around decarbonization in its own operations long before I rocked up, and so we've been on that journey for quite some time. But I think what we take most pride in is that actually what we do helps in terms of transition. We think that a good 90% of our portfolio is either directly linked to sustainable outcomes, or depending on how our customers use our technology. I'll give you 2 different examples. One is anything that is linked to energy efficiency, of course, delivers cost because you're saving energy, but it definitely also at the same time delivers a carbon emission reduction. If you use our digital twin technology, you can optimize for quality, for cost, for green.
I'm scared now. A digital twin. Do I have a digital twin? Do you have a digital? What is a digital twin?
So the healthcare sector is working on digital twins of humans as well, but it basically means that we can take a product, something that is very tangible, and run it through a computer so that you simulate features of this product on the computer first. You can do the same with processes. We are now at a place also through rendering, and we work with partners like NVIDIA on this, where in a computer game on steroids, you can model entire factories on the computer first before you even touch anything in the real world. And we can even model how different product features might influence the production process. So this is really cool stuff, and of course when you think about things like resource efficiency, and combining, when we talk about combining the real and the digital world, we can do a lot in the digital world without actually using finite resources before it actually gets into the real world.
To become a more sustainable company, to contribute to a more sustainable world. So that's your first responsibility. Your second responsibility is what I used to know as human resources, and which I think now is called people.
Yeah, well, I like to call it people and organization, because at the end of the day...
Do you have a title in that, or are you then also the chief people?
No, I think what I'm called is the Chief People and Sustainability Officer for Siemens, but as a function we refer to ourselves as people and organization, because I just think, who wants to be a human resource?
Right.
Yeah, I mean, welcome Sabina, you're our favorite human resource, or and I just think we talk so much about how we want people to show up as who they are, then I don't like to talk about them as human resource, human capital, or employees. I'd just like to refer to them as the people who work at Siemens.
Right.
Yeah? And maybe allow me one other sentence. The organization piece was an interesting one when we did the renaming, because I got a lot of question about, why VO, why organization? And I think as a function, we're uniquely equipped to have a systemic look at how things play out. It's not our job to define the strategy for Siemens, but what is our job is to make sure that we look systemically at how you bring that strategy to life in structures and accountabilities, in processes and systems, but also in behaviors and capabilities. And I think this is where we take a unique lens on the system, on the living organism that is any organization.
So if you think about that, and so you don't think about human resources, we're all people, what kind of skills, what kind of capabilities, what kind of characteristics, in general terms, do you appreciate, do you like to see when it comes to the day that somebody joins a company? What do you look for?
Yeah, I personally start with very simple things like, do I get positive vibes and do I get energy? Yeah? For me, people interactions and organizations are at the end of the day something around energy. Yeah? Do I get a positive sense of energy, or do I get the and I think that is true for people, but it's also true for organizations. I think people self-select in terms of companies that way as well, or leaders. So that for me is one of those things. And then I just hope that people turn up with, let's call it an ambition. And I don't mean I want to be X, Y, and Z in 3 and 5 and in 10 years. But is there something that is really important for them? Is there something that they want to get out of bed for in the morning? And those are some of those fundamental traits that I think I'm looking at. And in Siemens we talk about the growth mindset a lot. I just love people who see opportunities and possibility,
right,
rather than mitigation of risks and tactics. I mean, any business needs a good solid enterprise risk management, don't get me wrong, but I think there is something around opening space, opening space for opportunity, opening space for growth, and that gives me energy, and I think that is good for any company as well. And then as an organization, we have decided that we would define some strategic learning priorities for us, and they are in the space of digitalization and AI, leadership, sustainability, and increasingly we are talking about foundational skills like collaboration, critical thinking, and I think that pairs well with AI, by the way, or creativity. So I think that's the mix of what we would strategically put learning agendas behind.
Right. And on overall, how many people work at Siemens today?
So without the healthineers, it's 250,000.
250,000.
With them, it's about 312. Yeah.
Wow, that's an enormous number. And you're, I'm going to say this again. You're one of 6 or 7 people only who are officially at the head of that company, right? This is the management committee or the managing board?
We call it the managing board, and for the longest time there was really only just 5 of us, and now there's 2 more members who joined in October. Both came from internal. One of them is a woman, which I'm very happy about. So it's now 7 and 2 women, and before it was me and 4 colleagues. And I think the beauty of being a small team is that you really still, have one dinner conversation, right, or one conversation around the table. You can sit at one table. And then with 7, that also still works, but it's a bit harder work to make that work.
I think there's, maybe one more scene, and then you really max out the table. So, you are in charge of the people and the organization. You're at the very top of this organization. You used until very recently to be the only woman, which in a way is fantastic that you are that you've reached that. But in another way, I suppose it's sad that we still live in a world. Would you say that that's the case for you? Do you agree with that it's sad that you are still, as a woman, one of the very few at the top German and European companies? Is that still the case also?
Well, I mean, luckily we do see the numbers growing in the right direction, but it's slow. No? I mean, let's face it, it's still slow. And if we just go by the fact that talent is distributed equally, then that shouldn't be the case. And we have set ourselves targets in terms of where we want to be in terms of senior positions, but more importantly, we also had a look at how does that actually trickle down, because we need to build the pipeline. And we said we also don't want to go for parity everywhere, but we want to be where we do that with the business generally. We want to be better than the market, and we certainly want to make sure that when we promote, the ratio of who we promote is respective of the population that we have. So if we have 40% women in a certain part of the organization, then our promotion rate should be 40% at least as well. And we know that there is parts of the world where we struggle to find certain role profiles on parity level, but then we want to be at least better than what is available in that market.
You say these things, and I suppose that they all make sense for most of us, and I suppose the same would be true when you talk about diversity, when you look at the nationalities that work at Siemens. But, we live in a strange world nowadays, don't we? Because on this very stage, you would have had somebody 3 weeks ago who would be very much of the belief that all this talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion, that's all all has to go. And in fact, you see this in corporate America. This is now a reality. These programs have to go out the door from a government point of view. So when you combine this sort of common sense, and I almost don't dare to use the word common sense anymore, but when you use these things that are very straightforward, these logic that you explain, when you have a population of 40%, you want to see promotion of 40%. And on the other hand, you have this external environment in some countries. How do you deal with that?
I think one of the learnings of what's happening right now is that I think we need to go back to the why this is important. And at Siemens, we look at this in two ways predominantly. One is, what are some of our core values? And our core values are around respect, openness. We value diversity. So there's something around our core values that that we're not just going to throw out after 177 years. Yeah? They're here to stay. They're here for the long term. The second thing that I believe we're not talking enough about in this context is, why are diverse perspectives important, and particularly in times like these that are totally unprecedented. If we think about all the things that have happened just in the last 5 years, we would have never thought that even 6 years ago. And for as long as business or the world runs on evolution, the next iteration of the 6.7, 8.0 of something, you can probably afford to pay less attention to that. But if the world is as unpredictable as it's become, if it's as pacey as it's become, we need to wrestle for the best opportunities, the best decisions, the best judgment, and the likelihood that that comes from a very homogeneous group
is low.
Is just very low. Yeah? And I think sometimes we get hung up in programs and quotas rather than talk about the value of, and double down on where that is really most important.
Right. If I turn maybe as a last question on the business side, because I want to talk about you as a person. On the business side, we are also living in a country here. I don't live here, but we are in a country here and a region that has been historically a very advanced economy and has been extremely competitive and successful globally. Siemens' business, I'm sure, is fully global and a lot of export. On the other hand, you see that there's now a lot of anxiety in this society about, is this going to continue? Are we still going to be competitive? Are we still going to be able to compete with the big tech companies from the US and others? If you turn that to where you find excitement, where you sort of see within Siemens, wow, they're doing really cool stuff, what would you say that is?
Yeah, if I go back to some of the examples that I've given earlier, I think that Europe has such a strong industrial base, so many great technologies around that, so much data, yeah, that sits in the industrial space. I think where Europe and Siemens have a real opportunity to lead is in industrial AI. Is in the industrial metaverse, some say, because the consumer space has long gone to the US. Platform businesses from a consumer perspective have gone to the US. But I think here we have a real treasure in terms of data, in terms of domain knowledge, in terms of technology, where we can combine these things. And I would still hope that some of the technologies that are needed from a green transition also have a chance to come out of Europe. But the race is on, because battery and solar is already going to China to a large extent. But I think this is where we really have an opportunity. And interestingly enough, neither as Siemens nor as Europe, we actually have struggles to find the real AI experts, because that industrial space is one that is attractive to people, because it's still a lot physics-based. It doesn't hallucinate, because you can't afford industrial AI to hallucinate, that runs backbones of economies and important infrastructure. So there is something about this where I think we can play a real key role, but the clock is ticking, and I think one of the big challenges of the next German, the next French government and the new EU Commission is about making sure that we find that sweet spot between clean and competitive.
Right. I guess I could ask you more about that, but I want to get to some nicer questions. I want to get to know you as a person, and we'll, if there's time at the end, we'll get back to the tough questions about how are we going to overcome all these challenges. And by the way, if any of you have questions, you should also feel free after the next round of questions that I'm going to ask to raise them. We want to make this interactive as well. So Judith, we're here in a room now full of very bright students and people from around the world. If we go back in time and you imagine that you were there and that you were 20 again, who was Judith at that time? Did she already know she was going to be a managing board member at Siemens one day?
Clearly not. Clearly not. No, I think I need to start with my, one of these classic high school years to the US at the age of 16, 17. I think that infected me in terms of wanting to do something international, wanting to live abroad.
You did like an exchange year in the US?
Yeah, I did one
Germany.
of those classic exchange years. I lived with an American host family, and after that, it was clear to me that I was going to be around the world. And then I went through a very sophisticated process of thinking, how do I do this best? Lawyer? Business? Anything else? I went with business, and quite honestly, it was not more elaborate, I have to admit, than that. And then I very quickly I also got interested in the people space and the people in organization space. And I think today what I love is that you have this intellectual challenge that comes with business and strategy, and you have the wonderful messiness of,
Right.
working with and through people, and one is nothing without the other. Even if we try to pretend that we're only rational beings the
Sure.
minute we go to work.
And so you've done that. And by the way, and where do you come? You are from Germany, right?
I am German.
And so you were in a big city, a small town?
No, neither. I grew up in North
Provincial.
Rhine-Westphalia, which is one of the biggest states here. The town wasn't big, but it has plenty of big cities around. But then I went to the Midwest, and I lived in a town of 6,250
Wow.
people. And I always say my first assessment center was being selected because I was fortunate to get a scholarship to go to the US. And they said at the time, bring slides. And I am as old as, slides at the time were these little thingies that went into a carousel. And so I wrote to the German Office of Tourism to get them to send me these little things, and I added a few private ones, and because they said you might be asked to give a presentation, I ended up giving 40 presentations in Iowa, and
Wow.
and so I always think, my first assessment center, my first kind of presentation school, and so
That's fascinating. It
Yeah.
seems like you follow around U.S. presidents. You're here where J.D. Vance spoke. You were in Iowa at the country fair.
Well, Iowa
Maybe you're
is where
gonna
the
be the
first
next
caucus
Angela
happens.
Merkel
Yeah,
one day.
so I actually had in my town of 6,250 people, Michael Dukakis turned up as the Democratic
the
candidate
Democratic
at the time,
candidate.
and Bush Senior spoke at my high school.
Wow, very cool. Okay, so this is where you were then. You said, I'm going to go international, I'm going to go into business, and I'm going to do people. Well, it was then still called human resources, I think. And then did you immediately get a first job also abroad, meaning outside of Germany? Did you start in Germany? What was your path from there on out?
My first role was in Germany, but then I quickly buggered off, and I joined Mars in the UK. I applied for a job in Germany at the time because that was advertised, and they offered me a job in the UK, and so that was 19 years of Mars Incorporated, starting on an English contract, and then traveling the world with Mars, and then I spent 3 years with a Dutch-based special chemical company called DSM, now DSM Firmenich, and then I got a phone call from the man who's now the CEO of
And is
Siemens.
it really that way? Is it really that once you get going and you sort of have your first international experience and you find a good company, from there on out you just go with the flow? You have sort of a serendipitous career, or because you just summarized those 20 years in 30 seconds. Was it just one blur, or were there like key moments where you had to make big decisions and you were like, oh, shouldn't I go back to Germany, or what am I doing? I should be there or here.
I was interestingly never keen to come back to Germany. I actually enjoyed my international grand tour. No, but to go back, I think if we want to spend a bit more time on my 19 years with Mars is an organization that absolutely believed in development. A good hire was one that you promoted at least twice and was somebody who would learn.
And Mars, I think we all know what it is. This is the Mars company that of course makes the Mars snack bar, and makes many other snack bars, and also is huge in pet food, right?
Pet foods, by now also veterinary clinics, Uncle Ben's Rice,
Huge
so
consumer
big
goods
fast-moving
company.
consumer company. Still privately owned. Interestingly enough, I work for 3 companies that have all been there for 100 years plus. So there must be something about places that have values and value leadership. And Mars valued people and leadership and principles by which they operated, and I think I've taken that with me as into my big backpack. The role that P&O played was a critical one, because Mars operated on the idea that any organization within Mars has a pilot and 2 co-pilots, which are called finance and P&O. So
and P&O being people in organization.
People in organization. So it was always clear that you play this role very close to where business is. You're a business leader first and foremost, and then you have a function that you represent. And a lot of emphasis was placed on leadership development, and a lot of emphasis was placed on learning through rotation. So I've done lots and lots of rotations, and also international in a lot of countries,
yeah.
And very often this came with development centers or selection processes, and as much as you didn't like them in the moment, I always found that they were good check-in points with myself at the time. What do I really want? Where am I? What have I learned? What
because
do I
you are
still
then
want
moving
to
to another country, you are moving houses, so those are natural moments where you're like, okay, what happened? What am I going to do?
Yeah, but also, which job am I going into? Yeah? What can I add to it? What do I really get excited about? Can I have impact? What impact do I want to have? And I think there's, as you mature, I think as a leader, you understand that you are an instrument of change. So I think a lot of the leadership development that I got was about who am I, and not just what do I know. And how do you actually use yourself as an instrument of change and you know, the impact that you can create. And then there's the we, what do you do with your team? And there's the it, what do you do from an organization perspective?
Yeah.
And I think that's always what you know, what I've really appreciated about those years of growing up, if you like, because I think we all start keen to prove ourselves, and I think the minute you start switching into how do I improve myself, how do I improve the business, how do I improve and help people improve themselves, that's actually where it gets far more rewarding.
You go from proving yourself to improving yourself. I love that. I love that insight. And you know, so you've had this journey. Would you say that the most important thing that allowed you to go on this 20-year journey with Mars in this case, that it was a company that had values, that you felt that you were looked after? Is that what you would advise students today to look for in a job? That they're not just looking at what is the job about, but what is the company about, and what does the history of the company tell me about where it might lead me?
Well, I mean, at the end of the day, you're all grown-ups, huh? I mean, you will have your own selection criteria and things of what's important to you. And I think that's a really first important message. You know, take every good advice with a pinch of salt, because it is simply somebody else's advice, and you need to come to conclusions yourself. So I think there's something about, you know, really staying open to what resonates with me. But I think there's something about the type of company that you choose from what is the business, and do I actually connect with the business I'm going to be in? And then there's clearly something around, you know, what's the vibe, what's the smell of the place? And I go back to things like, is there energy? Is there positive energy? Is there also opportunity in my role, but also in terms of what I can do with my role? That was appealing for me. But I would also say I've always been more of a generalist than a specialist, which might sound strange because I've spent all my career in P&O, but I've always liked you know, understanding the broader context. I've always liked the systemic view on things, and there are people who will love, you know, to go into something where they have deep expertise, and you know, they might make different choices. And I feel that today I have the luxury of being in a company that has great technology, great experts, but I sit in a place where I can still see a lot and choose to go where I want to have an impact. And that for me today is very much around what I would call sustainable employability. And the sustainability agenda that we do from a portfolio perspective in Siemens. But I really believe, and therefore I have an ambivalent relationship with the word where you're being looked after or care, because I don't trust paternalistic systems. I think what we need to do is provide psychological safety, provide infrastructure for growth, but then treat people like adults and let them make their own choices. And, by the way, decisions that we would have hired them for in the first place.
Wow, that's amazing. I mean, like, it's an amazing insight to think about paternalism and sort of empowerment, and saying you really have to create an environment of empowerment. But then, of course, it's also amazing because you're saying that while sitting at the top of an organization and making sure that in your organization this is true, while surely at some point in the past of that organization it would have been more paternalistic as well.
Yeah.
So you're driving that change also in your current job, I'm sure.
Yeah, and don't get me wrong, paternalistic organizations have a really good core, which is care.
Right.
It's just a question of how that care then is coupled with other concepts. Is care,
sure,
you know, does it come with we'll tap you on the shoulder when you're being asked, or does it come with, no, we really want to hear from you.
Yeah.
You know, how are you going to make an impact in our organization? But we'll support you. So we'll take care that there's support structure. That is a slightly different nuance, I think, and this is a journey that clearly we've been on, and in a large organization like ours, I don't think I would ever dare to say we're there.
Sure.
But this is a journey we're on, and that's a journey that's recognized. And by the way, that also our social partners, works councils, have gone happily with, to say, no, we support that actually, that people keep learning, that we also send messages around up and reskilling as the best way to actually secure employment by being employable.
Right, that makes a lot of sense. And you have, of course, those unions, you would say, in another country, and here it's more formalized as a works council. We're getting to the part of the conversation where I'd love to open it up to the audience. So I don't know if we have a microphone. I'm going to see. We've got 2 questions over there.
Yes.
So we're going to start with that, and then we're going to come on to this side. So we had a gentleman over there, yeah. And so if you want to quickly say who you are and ask your question, and then you can pass the microphone to the next person.
So my name is Leo. I'm studying in EU Business School. This is my last semester, and I wanted to ask you a question about. So there was a couple of weeks ago, there were many great world leaders here at the security conference. Then there's a lot of potential ongoing talks about the ceasefire in Ukraine. I would like to know, does Siemens have any plans after the ceasefire is reached, and will Siemens be playing a part in rebuilding and reconstructing Ukraine? Thank you.
Thank you. Very important question. And I'm going to see if we can take one more question over there, and then you can answer. And then I'll come to this side. Very suspenseful, because I also want to know the answer to that question, Judith.
Hi, my name is Jacques van Rensburg. I'm from South Africa, studying BA International Relations here, and background political science and systems thinking. I'm already writing my doctorate with my former university in interdisciplinary thinking. It's a sub-discipline of systems thinking which we're developing. Anyway, so something that I've been seeing, having attended the MSc as much events as I could have possibly, I think we attended 12 or something, was that sustainability this year was not part of the conversation at all. Last year very much, this year defense, and so forth, and so forth. But the thing is, you can prepare for defense and so forth, but Earth will keep on going. And how does Siemens make sure that sustainability keeps part of the conversation? Because even if you look at, for example, last year's COP, it was not as relevant anymore as the previous one, and we keep moving away from the things that we really should be looking at. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. Two very important questions to start with.
Yeah, let me start with geopolitics and the Ukraine. I mean, as a global business, that is always a tough one to navigate. Huh? We've been in many countries around the world for many years, including Russia for 150, and we took the decision at the time to get out of Russia for the obvious reasons. And we have engaged in the Ukraine where we don't have that many people. It's a smaller country from a number of people perspective for us, but we have been engaged in helping the people on the ground, also building refuge places in Poland for the longest time, and we will play a role in the rebuild of the Ukraine as well. Yes. So that is an important one, and
is it too early to speculate whether companies like yours, but many others, would also go back to Russia if there is ever a peace? Is there any historical precedent that you can look at in Siemens, for example?
I don't know, actually. I don't know whether there's any historical precedent, at least not of that size.
So for now, it's really that was a decision to get out, and that's it for now. I mean, like.
Yeah, it was a tough decision. You know, we built the iconic train, high-speed train for Russia, the Zapsan, and we have a lot of people in Russia, and we wanted to also do right by our people in Russia at the time. But anyway, it was a decision that we took. It's, by the way, something that I believe is part of leadership today more than ever. How do you deal with ethical decision making? And I think very often ethical decision making is misunderstood for there's a right and there's a wrong answer. I think COVID has shown us that very often ethical decision making is about solving a dilemma and making that transparent to your people and as a board as well. Because if I think about Germany in COVID, the question of do you intrude on people's privacy or do you restrict their movement, neither of these values would you ever want to compromise on, but one of them had to be compromised on. So I think that excursion maybe on how I look at ethics, business ethics today, for me it's increasingly in the way the world is going a question of calling out the dilemma and then having a good, robust dialogue around how to deal with the dilemma. We don't know. We haven't had a conversation about whether and when to go back into Russia.
But sustainability is something that you
will.
continue to focus on. To get to the second question.
Sustainability is something that we absolutely will continue to focus on. We're ourselves not an energy-intensive company, but nevertheless we want to make sure that we work on our own operations, our footprint, our products as well. But like I said, the biggest value that we can actually contribute is through our portfolio. And despite the fact that there is, tendencies that would deprioritize sustainability or even call it woke, I think the necessity for an energy transition, the necessity for energy efficiency, the opportunity that technology places on actually making that sweet spot of cost-effective and green a reality. That doesn't go away, and we think we have a big role to play in driving that. So for us, it's not a contradiction, and by the way, for many of our customers, neither. And when we look at countries, maybe last comment on that, China is really now taking a lead in this. We already talked about or mentioned clean technologies like battery and solar, but the Chinese government, with their rigor of 5-year plans, has a huge decarbonization agenda, now followed by a circularity agenda, have embraced reporting, disclosure, have embraced international standards. So I think we will also simply find that certain geographies might now take the lead that might come as a surprise historically, but as a global business, we will continue to serve all customers and governments in that regard.
Excellent. I saw a question over here, and then I think a gentleman over there.
Thank you. Well, thank you, first of all, for the insights. Mariana, my name is. I'm teaching human resources, but despite I love human and organization much more, the question is the following about the Generation Z. I'm quite concerned that the media, the LinkedIn, etc., portray the Generation Z as lazy and not adaptable to working conditions. I highly disagree, and we have a lot of Generation Z here today. The question is the following: how do you make Siemens attractive for Generation Z? How do you adjust your culture to meet the needs of Generation Z? The research says that by 2030, there will be 30% of labor, the Generation Z, which is in 5 years. Yeah, thank you.
Mm-hmm. Thank you so much. And then there was another question over there from a gentleman.
Thank you so much for the opportunity. I'm Benuel Omanga from Kenya, studying data science and business analytics in EU. I have a question. Since we are talking about leaders, we are leaders of today, not tomorrow. So how can you advise us to prepare for uncertainty and economic disruptions, having that you joined Siemens under the pandemic period? The second one revolves under the digital twin that you talked about. It really focused the way you brought it out about resource optimization. Have we really embraced how we can have safety by design on it, such that it can also help to adapt the safety of the people who are going to be the end users of the products that you produce? Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. Excellent questions.
Yeah, let me start with I so wholeheartedly agree that very often the media has a tendency to write off an entire generation, which I think is totally unjustified. It's very interesting. I've just read stats, I think it was Germany or Europe, where very clearly the research and the stats show that they're actually working more. Which I found very interesting and very reassuring, because I just don't have that impression at all that this is a generation that is lazy. It's a generation that is more confident about what it wants and doesn't want, and much more articulate about what it wants or doesn't want. And it's a generation that is probably voting with their feet much more quickly when they encounter leaders that that don't provide the type of coaching or environment that they were hoping to find, or teams environment that they were hoping to find. I do think that they are looking forward for meaningful development, as much as possible, self-determination and being in the driver's seat of making decisions that are important for them. And I think they want to find meaning and purpose in what they do. And so, how do we address that? Through as much flexibility in working conditions as we can possibly give, really good development on all fronts. And we talk a lot also in the attraction around technology with purpose. Yeah? So rather than only catering, for the technical side, really always point out what that technology is there to do and how that really can change, lives of people, customers. And that really resonates. That has really resonated with people. So we're not struggling to attract. We get about 4 million applications per year. We hire about, depending on the post-COVID years, between 30 and 40,000 a year. But you're right, the demographic change is hitting us, particularly in Europe and China. But we don't have attraction issues, luckily. So. Well, let's keep it that way. Now you need to help me again. The second part of your question was, do we do safety by design, right? For products, and the answer is yes, by and large. I mean, we rarely configure for consumers. Yeah? So it is typically products that go into the equipment of other people and then go to an end user, or it is part that is built into a production line or into a building, in the way that it's operated. But nevertheless, also through the digital twin technology, we can, for example, also simulate the ergonomics of certain processes. So even how people then work in factories that are designed in a certain way, we can simulate that through technology as well. And of course, particularly when it comes to electrification, there's massive standards on safety for obvious reasons, because because that would when you deal with particularly medium voltage, that would be very detrimental if we didn't. So that is very much part of what we do. And now you need to help me on the first part of your question.
It was about how we can prepare for uncertainty and maybe economic disruptions. Like my friend's first question was about the geopolitical disruptions that we have. How do you prepare for that? Thank you.
I think any good company does scenario planning now, but again, I mean, even with the best of scenario plans, I wonder whether anybody would have predicted, like I said, the last 5 years. But I think as an organization, through COVID, we learned, as many others, a lot about resilience. The more digitalized you are as a business and the more insights you have, I think, again, the better you can either switch and shift, and or you have more insights about where you have your vulnerabilities. But the rest of it is scenario planning, and the huge advantage that we have as Siemens is simply a very, very established global footprint that allows us to shift more than maybe other companies can in terms of how they are set up.
Excellent. Judith, I'm afraid we are already at the end of our conference, but before I let you go, I want to ask you one final advice. Like really an advice. Most of the people here in the room are going to go very soon into the job market, are going to join companies, make careers, If you look back at your career, and now you can also look forward to the rest of your career, of course, but what would be your best piece of advice to the Gen Z that's now entering the labor market?
Yeah, I think the first one I already alluded to. I think the clearer you are about what drives you, yeah, and where you want to go and have an impact, the better. Because everything else is more, reading outside in. Yeah, what do people expect? What advice do I get? I mean, the more this comes from here in terms of, what am I really interested in? Where do I want to have an impact? Where do I want to apply myself? I mean, you just can't go wrong. Yeah. The other thing that I would say, whilst decisions at your stage of a career might seem as the one decision that is irrevocable forever, it's not. Yeah? You'll be working 50 years probably. So, there's plenty of time to course correct, yeah, if you really chose wrong. So I think there are some decisions that are more reversible than others, but quite honestly, just give yourself a bit of slack, yeah? And just choose. And if you chose not wisely or not well in hindsight, well, you choose differently. And if I were to sit my younger self back down, I would give myself the advice that I should do more external networking sooner. So building connections, building networks, meaningful networks, I think is what I would have done much, much sooner. And that was maybe one of the downsides of being in a company that was that was very happy-clappy and to an extent very internally focused. I had a massive internal network in Mars. But if I were to sit myself down, I would say, you make sure that you have external networks very soon.
That's great, and of course we're going to make sure that for the rest of this week and tonight, we're going to do some of that networking. Judith, it's been really amazing to have you. Although actually you had us because this is the town of Siemens. So I want to thank you again for that. Thank you for joining us. You're welcome back anytime. And for now, thank you, Judith.
Thank you, Peter. Thanks.
Well done. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.